And welcome everybody. Thanks for attending our session. I was telling the guys here when we were preparing earlier that the keynotes were awfully helpful to this discussion because both Jay and Jyoti emphasized that even though they're technical founders, that the key to success really is selling. And technology is sufficient, but not the complete solution. So I thought it'd be helpful for each of us to introduce ourselves. I'm John Dougery. I'm a venture capitalist and early stage. But the more interesting speakers here, I think, are our founders and entrepreneurs on the panel here, and I'd like each of them just in order to introduce themselves briefly and set the stage in terms of context of the type of company, the sector, the type of customer they're selling to, and the stage of the company.
Great. My name is Clegg. I am currently VP of Sales at PubNub. Prior to that, I was at Twilio for about 5 years. Ran various sales teams, ended up running account management, customer success, running the revenue there. Before that, I was at a company called Youre. If you're familiar with Mint.com, the way that Mint got their data was Youre. So across the board, 3 very similar sales models, very developer focused as far as educating on a platform. The customers that we had were really running businesses with the services we were provided, that API service. A very technical sales cycle, longer sales cycle as far as time to revenue, so a lot of similarities between those 3.
Awesome. So my name is Jeremy Almond. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Paystand. Paystand is a B2B payment platform, so you can imagine what a Venmo or PayPal does between consumers. We do for complicated commercial transactions, generally where there's paper checks and wires involved, with receivables and payables. We've raised about $10 million to date, and we're right in the middle of what I would consider the scaling stage of sales. So we're rapidly hiring sales teams, sort of learning as we go. And I would say maybe I'm the token person on the board or the panel here that is not a sales professional, but somebody who came from the product and engineering background. And so I can talk a little bit about what not to do. And I think maybe the importance of it. Sales is the most critical function to the business when you're scaling. And so for a technical person, a technical co-founder, learning how to transition the business at that stage is really, really important. So.
My name's Paul Swiencicki, and I think I'm a glutton for punishment because since 1997, I started at companies that were at 0 revenue and grew to something bigger than that. So 1997, we were at a company called Surf Control, went from 0 to 100 million. Then I started my own company, got VC funding, 5 million. We went to 0 to 5, and we sold. Then I started a company called Tatango. They were at 300K. When I left, they were at 6 million. Then at another company, startup called Circuit, which went from 0 to 3. And Tatango, I went from 1 to 7. And then today, currently, I'm at a company that is about 600K in revenue, and we're on track to probably hit 5 by the end of this year. So definitely love the pain of early stage startup companies.
Well, great introductions. I thought one of the first questions I thought I'd ask the 3 of you is really what has changed. I mean, selling's been around for, eons, right? But in terms of technology selling, product selling, specific to your business, if you just looked at it, say 2 or 3 years ago versus today in your own experience, what are the new approaches that are really generating the productivity and not just collecting data for data's sake?
So one of I think the biggest thing that I've seen is even 3 years ago, right? A lot of what you saw was there were 2 extremes. You either had kind of very top-down approaches to sales, or who we were going after, or which was a lead, which was worth approaching, which was an opportunity, or kind of bottoms up. Hey, here's a territory, you guys kind of figure it out. A lot of what I've seen over the last 3 years is a merging of those 2, giving a lot more power to the people on the line, right, to manage their territory, to automate some of how they do their work, to have kind of some of the stuff that was going on with Eloqua and Marketo now is actually in the hands of SDRs and sales reps to create their own campaigns and experiment. And that's one of the biggest things that I've seen, in addition with just firmographic data, having better understanding of who prospects are as a company, who individuals are when they're coming in, and reacting to that.
Yeah, I would say that I would agree with that. Certainly data on the sales side is getting more and more important. I think one of the things I've seen is particularly sales channels. There's a window where they become really, really efficient, and then they sort of go away, right? So maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you could drive sales, the channels through things like Google Ads and then Facebook Ads, and then maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when sort of the concept of SDRs as we know them today, SDRs were sending out sort of automated drip messages, and those automated drip messages, they had like a breakup email at the end of it that everyone was using, and now those emails look identical, and so people just tune them out, and so I think what you see is sort of windows of new tactics, particularly when you're driving in at the top of the funnel, and those windows change really, really fast. So what worked 2 years ago in some book that you read from, I don't know, Aaron Ross or something like that, that does not work today. And so you have to move really, really fast, and I think a key to that is being really nimble with your sales organization in the same way you're nimble with your product organization, and being very, very data heavy in the way you do it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer the question in 2 facets. One, which is general, about so that everyone can benefit from it, but also I think there's a lot of tech startups here, so I'm going to answer also from a tech startup perspective. So I think in general what's happened is, 3 years ago, it was more about the numbers. It was about, give me a list, I'm going to build this huge contact list, I'm going to build this huge, campaign, and I'm just going to go and I'm going to hit and I'm going to see who comes back, and then I'm going to attack those. And what happened was, and I did this myself, what happened was that shit in, shit out, right? So it's like, the people that respond are not always the people that you want, and therefore you're spinning around with your sales teams. So what we've done is we've gone to a more account-based management sales methodology, where you go in and you find the accounts that you want that match your current customers, your skill set, your product market fit, all of that, and then you go after those. And so specifically, I'm working with an early stage company in Boulder, Colorado right now. And one of the things that this guy, the CEO, wanted to do, he's like, look, I am going to blast all over LinkedIn. I'm going to, pay all this money. I'm going to, get all this activity. And what happened is that he got all this activity, and what he found was nothing came out of it. Mm-hmm. And instead, I told him, go back to your customer base and go to your customers and ask for referrals. Just ask them to say, can you introduce me to 5 of your friends? And literally, that's where all his business is coming from. So as a technical founder, or somebody who's early stage company, go to your customers and ask them to introduce you to other clients. It's the easiest way to build sales.
And maybe just add one thing to that, because it's a really good point. I think that people commonly make the mistake of just saying, look, I'm going to go tell everybody about this thing and we're going to see what falls out the bottom, right? And the reality is it just doesn't work, right? The best way to do it, especially when you have customers that are already in the door, right? You know who you're able to serve, is look at those customers, find similar companies and go after them. You are going to get a much better hit rate in doing that. And you're also frankly going to get a much better conversion rate by having people be thoughtful about how they're going out to an account, right? By having people think about who are they hitting, what is that message on a person-to-person level, rather than just giving a generic message to 10,000 companies.
That's great. That's great. That really kind of leads into the next question I had for you guys, which is the don'ts, what doesn't work, and are there things beyond the kind of boil the ocean, old school way of just spamming everybody that you can highlight that you've tried and doesn't work, or tools that have had a lot of promise but didn't work?
So one thing I would just call out is trying to over-engineer, especially early on, trying to over-engineer the sales team or the sales approach or the stages, right? The reality is, especially when you're smaller, you don't know, right? And you have to accept that you don't know, and you have to make sure that you have smart people in these roles to help learn, right? Give people freedom, give people the, salespeople specifically, the incentive and the ability to go, close deals and make money. And you will learn more about your sales cycle than if you said, here are the 10 emails you're going to send in this order, you're going to make a phone call here and then see what comes out. I would depend on people rather than depending on just process.
Yeah, I would say even more so on the product side. I think one of the mistakes I've certainly made in a previous company is There's an over-reliance on things like self-service. You might see some standout company that have just crushed it at self-service, so you think, oh, I can just put a form up on the website and people will just sign up and buy, and it's just, sales is going away, and it's totally wrong. We actually did that at one point in a previous company and then completely removed self-service, because one of the things that happens is if you sort of let anybody in, you have two problems. One, anybody can be in, and that means that you're getting the wrong customer profile and you're not being very targeted. The second thing that'll happen is, particularly if you're a little bit farther upstream and you're doing solution selling, it's much more difficult to do solution selling and to optimize the contract size and things like that if you have people just like automatically going through the funnel. So I think there was a whole wave of companies that sort of created this mentality in the valley that like, let's just automate everything, let's just drive self-service, and so it created this false dichotomy that like sales no longer is an art, and the reality is it is. And so yes, optimize the funnel, yes, be data driven in some ways, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is an art to sales, there's a science to sales too, but there's an art to it. So I'd be very leery of self-service unless you're really serving the low end of the market.
Mm-hmm.
Again, taking two tracks here, general and then for technical co-founders. So I think in general, outsourcing of lead development. If you think about it, that is the most critical function you can have inside of your company. It is literally bringing in what everyone is going to be working on for the next year. And so a lot of times people will go out and outsource this and they don't have control. You need to iterate. You need to basically get a lead, figure out what is right, what is wrong with it, and then move on. So hire the person and spend the time to train that person up. From a technical co-founder perspective, the don'ts, don't let anybody else sell except yourself. Like, you are responsible for the selling of your product for the first 10 to 20 customers. And do not let anybody else do that. There is so much learning, there's so many things that go on. Whether you want to do it or not, you have to. The success of your company is based on that.
Yeah, I would say, especially sort of sitting as a technical person, if you're going to be the CEO, you need to sell. That's,
Great points, and particularly that last one about especially at the early stage, the founder and the technical founder getting deeply involved in the sales process. That kind of brings up the sequencing question, from a startup perspective, right? Not just any company perspective, but have you guys seen how and defined ways that your sales process, your sales approach is going to change as your company grows? So from those first days where it's just the founders to mid-stage, late stage, how do you see that progressing, and what are the breakpoints in your mind where you can start to move to more sophisticated tools or other things?
Yep. I mean, one big one, I don't know if there is a specific, it's company size or it's team size or it's customer size. I think that in the end, what really matters, one big thing that I've seen, having been on sales teams that are less than 10 people, and then especially Twilio growing to 100 people by the time I left, the breakpoints along that, really, one was the point where people can't do everything, right? Especially early on, you have salespeople that are kind of being technical, and people are just like jumping in on deals, and territories are less defined, and you're just trying to get stuff done and get deals done, and that's fine, right? But as you move along and you get larger, you can't have all of the information in your head at once, right? About all the products, about all of the pieces. You also don't want territory overlap. So if you start to get to the point where people are stepping on each other's toes, that's a great indicator that you need to define further what your sales team looks like, who they're going after, right? And another one is just on systems and process. As you start to understand what are the discrete things that people are doing, whether that's stage in the funnel, whether that's information, technical versus not, right? Making sure that people have a defined goal and defined metric that they're actioning against, rather than just the close of the deal, right? Those are kind of big breakpoints that I've seen.
Yeah, maybe one of the things I drill into along that side is the tools and the tactics, where What you use is really important to what stage you're at. So I would say don't use Salesforce if you have 2 salespeople, right? And that sounds silly, but people do it. I've done it. So use the right tools for where you're at in this stage. Recognize at what point you want to go from a super scrappy sales CRM system that might be out of Gmail, and then all of a sudden you might have, I don't know, 5 reps, and you need to move to something like a HubSpot or sort of like a automated mid-size CRM, and then at some point you will need to have more defined process as you have reps that have specific territories with specific verticals. So be really, really careful about over-engineering that piece. And then I think another thing that I would be careful about in the early days is I certainly had these moments where you'll sort of look at like outside, if you're analytical, you'll look at like outside ratios in the pipeline and you're like, oh, here's what the ratio should be from SQL to op or something like that. And the reality is in the early days, that's really, really hard to do. Instead, focus on how do you improve each stage as opposed to like what's normal. Normal is not normal when you're early stage and you don't know. So don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to how do you constantly improve each stage of the funnel. And then at some point, you'll get enough scale where you'll actually be able to do sort of more traditional analytics around the funnel, but you certainly don't do that too early. Focus on improving what you do have.
Can I make one point just on that? The other thing that you kind of hit on, but I think is important to call out, is the person that's going to be successful in a small sales team at an early stage startup is different from the person that's going to be successful on a 100-person sales team. And it's important to recognize that. Hiring the guy that was 20 years at Oracle, right, in a very structured sales environment to be like your first sales guy is maybe not always the best move. And it's just really understanding that profile also changes as you progress through that size.
So I think I live and die by the sales process, and it's a good question that you asked. And again, generally I'll talk about it, and then for technical co-founders. So. With the sales process, you have to have a sales process. You cannot see if you're succeeding or failing if you do not have a structured way that you sell your product. And it could be as simple as 5 simple stages, which is like discovery call, then it's demo, then it's business discussions, ROI, then it's negotiation, and then close, right? It could be as simple as that. But the point is that you have to have these sales processes in place so that you can continually iterate. I always, every quarter, look at my sales process and say, how did I do? Where are we falling down? And I always have 3 different sales processes. I have one that deals with deals that are probably over $500,000 each. I have another sales process that does, like 100,000 to 500,000, and then I have another sales process that does, $0 to $100,000 in revenue, and that's specific for my product. For the technical co-founder, the most important thing you should do is just write it down. Like, I don't care, just stream of consciousness, just write down what you think your sales process is, and then you can basically always go back to that and see like, oh, what do I need to change? And so one of the big changes that I made in my sales process as I started to iterate and start closing the first couple of deals is something what I called a workshop. And the workshop is essentially working with the client, hands-on, either over WebEx or Zoom, or going on site and literally giving them access to your product so they can see what your product does. And this will instantly show them if there's value or not. And again, this was a critical phase in me being able to increase the close rates, because I saw that there was this big discrepancy between demo and moving to the next phase.
One of the things I'd add to what Paul just said that I think is important, right when you're at the stage where you're actually starting to hire salespeople and start working on repeatability, this seems really obvious, but it's surprisingly hard at this stage, is make sure everyone actually knows the definition of those the sales stages. It's amazing how many times I've done it, I've seen other companies do this where not all the reps actually agree on what the stage is, because it's new. You just introduced it. You went from some scrappy process to you actually had stages, and they don't all know what that is, and that's really, really important as you start putting structure in the organization, because you guys all have to agree with it. And companies that are farther along already have it, so there's sort of already a inbound sales culture. But when you first create it, it's surprisingly difficult to get everyone to really know and understand and agree on the stages when you first put them in.
And just one thing, just from being having been on the receiving end of changing sales stages, don't change it too often.
Yes.
Right? Change it at most maybe once a quarter. You have to try it, you have to stick with it. If you change it too often, I guarantee no one will know what the sales stages mean.
Yeah. You know, a lot of this discussion has been about that mid-stage, starting to scale phase of a company. And since all of you have been at, early stage companies and more than one in many cases, maybe we could take a step back and talk about how you guys landed your first 3 or 5 customers in your current company that are currently still relevant to what you're trying to scale against. Obviously, there's a lot of iterations in early stage startups. So if you think about that final early phase before you started scaling, how did you get those first 3 or 5 customers?
So I have not been in the situation where I'm signing those 3 to 5, but I can say that in all 3 of those companies, so Youre, Twilio, and PubNub, in all cases, the first 3 to 5 big ones were CEO or board level contacts, right? It was going out, here's what we're doing, here's why it's cool, right? Talking a lot to a lot of people. Didn't work with a lot of them. Those guys are no longer around, but the customers that it did work for, today, as we're starting to build scale into the sales system, we're looking at why did it work? Why are we valuable there? And then we're trying to put process and trying to put intelligence into who else we're going after based on that. But early stage, in all honesty, I think it's a lot of conversation. It's a lot of, the CEO out selling, the founders out selling, and just talking about why this is a great thing that you've built.
Yeah, it's very, you're a missionary in the early days, right? And I think that's again why it's so important, both as co-founder and the first salesperson. It's often not the person who scaled 100 salespeople as the first person, because it's very, very relational. I think there's another misnomer that you put up a website, you get on TechCrunch, and then you're going to get you're going to get a bunch of leads that way if you get on TechCrunch, but rarely are those your first true customers. I think if I looked, our first easily 30, maybe to 50 customers were all ones I knew directly, the board knew directly, or someone on our team knew directly. And then I think even past that, it became this thing where we did a lot of hand-to-hand combat in the early days. Like we sort of purposely didn't focus on marketing at all. Instead, we were like, we know there's 5 customers that look somewhat similar. Where can we find another 5 people that look similar to those customers? It was very, very much like just pick one, move on, pick one, move on until you get to, let's say, your first 100 customers.
I'm going to teach you a little trick here. I think this is probably the most important thing if you're a technical co-founder. And again, I've been at 6 different startups where we sold the first few deals. The most important thing is to ask for help with the customer. And you go in there and you say, look, my name is Paul. I'm the CEO and co-founder of this company, and we're building this technology that we think is going to make a game-changing impact in the market. And really what I need is just your help. Can you just look at this and share with me your feeling? Is this going to make sense? And it's really hard for anybody who has compassion or empathy to say no to that. And so if you are a technical co-founder and you're trying to get into customers, take that tactic, ask for help, share your vision, and they will not say no. And you might find that there are some that just don't match, but then you're going to find a lot that actually match. And then what you do is you listen to their problems, and then you build your product and your future roadmap based on that, their feedback.
Yeah, and the thing I would add with what Paul said was, you need to treat those like their gold. Because sometimes, particularly for a company like ours, which is commercial payments, it's a big deal if a company is on us, especially in the early days. And so, somebody might put their job on their line to take a chance on you. They might, they're joining the early missionary risk with you. And so you need to treat that really, really delicately. But because they're joining that early risk with you, they're a little bit different than customers you'll get later in the stage. They're going to be willing to be evangelists oftentimes. And so because of that, I think there's a lot of goodwill that's going to come out of it. And so I would, not only do you need to spend in the early days a lot of time with sales, you need to spend post-sales a lot of time with those early folks to understand and support them very well, because they're going to help you get your next 100.
And let me just, one thing to just pile on here, is I think it's really important the asking for help was an interesting thing, but it just reminded me 2 years ago at Twilio at Sales Kickoff, Jeff Lawson, who's the founder and CEO of Twilio, gave a talk at Sales Kickoff, right? We had him kind of come up and talk through the early days of selling Twilio, and it's funny, he showed the first email that he sent to Uber, right? Now Uber went to, this was a little startup then. I remember when I first joined Twilio, essentially they gave out gift cards for Uber because we just signed a deal with them, and that was a big deal to Uber, right? They ended up being over $50 million a year customer for Twilio, but it started with Jeff Lawson sending an email to the CEO of Uber, Travis, just saying, hey, here's some things that I think you could use Twilio for. I'd like to get together and just get your thoughts on what we're doing here, right? That was the first email. It turned into a $50 million plus customer.
Yeah, fantastic. One of the other topics that's top of mind lately is automation, right? Everybody's talking AI, they're talking automation. They're saying, hey, maybe we don't need salespeople anymore. We're going to do MarTech. We're going to automate everything, get you inbound, exactly what you want, manage it right to the close. What, if anything, at the startup phase and then the scaling phase, have you seen that works in terms of automation?
I mean, the biggest thing that I've seen in terms of automation is really giving more power to the individual, right? So the person that's actually on the line, whether it's an SDR or it's a rep or it's a field rep, whoever it is, giving them more power to iterate and experiment and try things and have the information that really before was only available at the system level, right? So tools like an Outreach or Yesware or, things like DataFox or Clearbit, these give more power to the rep, which actually I've seen have a lot more impact than just trying to do it from a top-down perspective.
Yeah, I would say I'm a big fan of automation, but I wouldn't do it too early. And when you do automate, training becomes really, really important because especially a lot of things at the bleeding edge of AI and account-based selling and account-based marketing, they're new enough that you can just assume that the reps probably haven't all used it, and so you need to spend a lot of time training to really empower them, because it's not about removing a rep. Most of the time it's about making them more efficient. So you want to be able to help them do their job better, close better, sell better, target better, and so I would say it's important to invest in your team so that it becomes the tool for their success, not a tool that somehow replaces an SDR function or replaces. I think that's not going away. I think, but allowing people to be more efficient with their time so they can close better and get better commission checks. Those are all great things that everyone should like. So.
Yeah, as I said earlier, everything is moving from the marketing team to account-based management. And so with account-based management, that means that the individual is now responsible for a lot of the communication and outreach. And so these tools have been able to help the individual reach out and do it in an automated fashion. So for me, I'll tell you specifically, we use sequences. And so there's a lot of products out there that you can get. But sequences is basically, you set a contact, you set an account, and you basically set 7 messages that go out, and there's an if-then statement. If the person responds, then go to this track. If the person doesn't respond, go to this track. And we know that it takes 7 to 10 efforts to actually get somebody to respond. So there's no physical way you can remember to send all of these emails in the right sequence. And so, using that technology and arming your team with it is just absolutely crucial. The other thing that I've found very, very helpful is I've been using automated voice recording. So products like Gong.io or Chorus .io. And what they do is they listen to all your reps, and then they start to classify based on the words that you use during those sessions. So I can quickly, when someone says, what's your price, I can quickly go to the call and I can listen to my rep. So it's saving me time so that I can get to the meat that I want to actually listen to for that specific rep. The other thing that I've been using it for, which is actually fantastic, is I've been using it for training material. So as I bring new reps on, it's always hard to get the right conversations at the right time. So again, you have this now bank of all of these automated recordings that you're making, and then you put them into your training material. And so as I bring on a new rep, I have them listen to all, and then what I do is I break it out into stages. So we have these 5 stages. Here are 10 recordings in stage 1, 10 recordings in stage 2, 10 recordings in stage 3. And so it's really getting the person up to speed much faster.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've hit the limit of our time, but I really want to thank our panelists for sharing all the insights and all the experience. Thanks.
Thank you.